So this video is a second in a series of social service outreach videos that highlight programs and services addressing three key city initiatives, this one being homeless. There is one that we saw earlier this year in December that was HIV Zero, and we have one more coming up in spring called Aging in Place. The video features an outreach specialist clinician who's here tonight, Jake Weinrob from the LA LGBT Center, who works collaboratively with the West Hollywood Sheriff's Station and the city's contracted homeless service providers to engage the homeless community members where they're at and link them to much needed services. And with that, Daryl can press play on the video. Thank you.
My name is Jake Weinrob, and I work as a mental health clinician at the Los Angeles LGBT Center in Mental Health Services. I'm here to help folks that are struggling with homelessness or substance use get linked to care. I basically am a walking referral guide for services that are available in West Hollywood, and on top of that, I'm providing field therapeutic interventions to try to keep some of these communities as safe and healthy as possible. I think that West Hollywood is a really special city. People who are homeless came to the city of West Hollywood for a lot of the reasons that we did. It's a community of choice. It's somewhere that feels safe, that feels like home. There's rainbow flags on the businesses. It's familiar, it's beautiful, it's queer. So I think these populations, these communities that we have here in West Hollywood, these are people who are here for a reason. A lot of homelessness, especially that I've seen and in this community, is related to early rejection from the family, a lot of time for being LGBT, also situations involving intimate partner violence and lack of resources. I wish that I, could wave a magic wand and help somebody who's on the street get off, but it takes time and it takes repeat interaction and a lot of building of trust. I've really had to adjust over the past year my idea of what a success is and kind of look at it as a small win. I think that any interaction that someone who is living on the street has where they feel seen for a moment is positive. So in a lot of my interactions, I'm not going to be giving everyone a referral all the time. Sometimes it's just a conversation, a positive interaction that is enough for that moment. The outreach services in the city of West Hollywood are unique because the city partners with lots of different organizations to meet some of these populations where they're at in terms of what they're looking for. So there's teams like Essentia or Step Up on Second that help with housing, Tarzana Treatment Center or Safe Refuge that focus on substance use, and organizations like Mental Health Services at the Center that focus on mental health and psychiatry, the Youth Center on Highland for some of our younger residents. This multidisciplinary approach is really important because each individual person has such a variety of needs. And I think it's going to take all of the compassion and understanding and empathy that the city was founded on to help those who are struggling in our community.
Thank you for that, Lisa. And Corey, are you going to introduce our panelists tonight and lead the discussion?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and council members. We want to thank you for providing this opportunity for us to delve into issues related to homelessness tonight and for your support of this collective work. Tonight, you'll see just how much the city's homeless initiative is truly a team effort. It includes nonprofit agencies, law enforcement, our county partners, the business community, our residents, and city staff from multiple departments. As you will hear, they are all invaluable to the city's efforts to effectively address homelessness. Tonight, we will do our best to convey the breadth and depth of what the city is doing in a short amount of time and have a thoughtful and informed discussion about the challenges and opportunities before us. So we just quickly want to go over a little bit of the city's homeless initiative, and then we want to get into discussion with our panel. Concerns about affordable housing and the prevention of homelessness run deep in the city's DNA. The homeless initiative of today can trace its roots to the city's early commitment to rent stabilization, inclusionary housing, and the provision of social services. As the challenges related to homelessness have grown and changed over the years, so have the city's efforts. So when the council approved guiding principles for the city's response to homelessness in 2016, it set the stage for the creation of the council subcommittee on homelessness and the launch of the city's homeless initiative to address these challenges. Each year, the city participates in the Greater Los Angeles Homeless Count conducted by the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, or LAHSA. The official 2017 count was 105, which represented 92 individuals on the street. While the results from this year's count are unofficial at this time, we did see a slight decrease in the number of individuals on the street and a slight decrease in the number of makeshift shelters. Additionally, our outreach teams from Ascensia conduct a early morning count every month on the last Friday of the month to gauge our overnight population, which in 2017 averaged 30 people. And as you saw in the video, we've also conducted demographic surveys, and so we know a little bit more about the people and the experiences behind those numbers, like they're younger than the population at large in the LA County continuum of care. They're more likely to be transgender, more likely to be lesbian, gay, or bisexual, more likely to have HIV-related illness, and experience with domestic violence and abuse. And as you also heard, they are here for the same reasons many of us are here. So given the scale and scope of this challenge, what do? In West Hollywood, we collaborate. We provide a range of social services, and we partner with law enforcement and other agencies. For the last 13 years, the city's social services division has convened the West Hollywood Homeless Collaborative. We continue to be part of the LA County Homeless Initiative, the West Side City's Council of Governments Homeless Working Group, and the West Hollywood Chamber of Commerce and their Homeless Committee. We contract with nonprofit agencies for shelter beds, homeless outreach services, substance abuse treatment, case management, and we fund programs to prevent homelessness. And the Sheriff's Department is well represented here tonight, so I just want to say for now, the COPS team deputies are at nearly every meeting that we have on homelessness in the city, whether that's neighborhood watch meetings, the Chamber of Commerce's Homeless Committee, or the Homeless Collaborative, and we're really appreciative of their efforts. We also have several of our providers here this evening, and they are available to answer questions. We have a big panel already, and we have a lot more experts in the audience as well. Over the past 16 months, with dedicated staffing and an even more focused effort, the city's homeless initiative has been able to implement a variety of special projects that were briefly touched on in the video. The library on-site service delivery project, which provides services 5 days a week at the West Hollywood Library. The Real Change parking meter program, which 4 meter donation stations have been installed throughout the city. These allow people to donate through parking meters with coins or credit cards to support the work of our providers and to increase community education about a different way to help people on the street. At the end of this month, we'll host our Homeless Services Connect Day, and as you saw from the video, we're working closely with communications to develop more collateral material and educational materials. So I'm going to bring my remarks to a close, and I think in the interest of time, we're going to go for our panel this way down, and then we'll come back over this way and down. And I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. So thank you so much, Council, and we'll pass it over to Jen Kem from the county.
Before you start, Jen, I want to thank all of the panelists for being here tonight and for all of the work you do when we're not seeing you at the council meetings. We really appreciate your willingness to be here. And in the audience, I know we have some of our public safety staff. We also have some of our human services commissioners. We have our human services staff. We have some of our park and recreation staff, some of our people from the library, all of whom are dealing with these issues on a day-to-day basis. And I want to thank all of you for your efforts, because it really is part of this collaboration. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Jen.
Okay, good evening, Council. Thank you for having me. Should I
Okay, we have technology, all right. So I can see the council is going to have sore necks.
So this is actually probably closer to a 10 to 15 minute presentation, so I'm going to probably skip through a lot of these slides to keep it brief. So the LA County Homeless Initiative, we're formed recently, about 2.5 years ago, when the board wanted to seize this moment of everything coming together, like political will and public support, and just the urgency of the homeless crisis in LA County. And so the Homeless Initiative was launched in the summer of 2015 with initial goal to develop a set of strategies to combat homelessness. And from the very beginning, collaboration and partnership was really the backbone of everything the Homeless Initiative has done. So the process to develop the comprehensive set of strategies to the passage of Measure H. The Measure H was passed in March of 2017 and will generate an estimated $355 million a year for 10 years. And a 50-member planning group came together to develop funding recommendations for the allocation of the Measure H revenue. So roughly you can see here that funding has been divided into these categories: prevention, subsidized housing, increased income, and so forth. And you'll see that the lion's share of funding goes toward the coordinated system and subsidized housing. And then under each of these categories are strategies, specific strategies. So the Measure H implementation from tax collection goes to the Measure H Special Fund and then flows through county departments and LAHSA to community-based service providers and their subcontractors. And tax collection started October 1st, but the Measure H strategies were actually started implementation in July. So one of the greatest things about Measure H is just the unprecedented level of partnership that it's allowed with cities and also with faith-based partners, service providers, and a lot of non-traditional partners that have been brought to the table for the first time. So some of the engagement opportunities with cities include partnership through the various Measure H strategies, events such as the annual summit to combat homelessness for cities. And I'll go over the partnership opportunities really quickly. So some of the strategies, the Measure H strategies, local cities can adopt their own local versions of these strategies, particularly around housing and land use. Or they can tap into Measure H strategies like the E4 First Responders Training, and then some of the outreach and health social services strategies, and the PSH MOU. So the county has extended this permanent supportive housing MOU to all 88 cities in the county, and it basically states that for every unit of permanent supportive housing created by any city, the county will provide the wraparound services for each of those units. And then grant-funded opportunities. The planning grant with West Hollywood was recently executed, and this is just to support cities in their development of local homelessness plans. There's also funding for COGS, councils of governments, to coordinate sort of a more regional plan. And finally, again, the guiding principle of the Homeless Initiative is collaboration. So homelessness, it's a regional problem that doesn't know any boundaries, and it's going to take a regional coordinated effort to effectively combat and prevent homelessness. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And while we're on our county group right now, we have Molly Reisman from Supervisor Kuehl's office. You want to tell us a little bit about the work you and the supervisor are doing on homelessness?
And thank you for having me tonight, Mayor and council members. We really appreciate everything that West Hollywood has done, both your long history addressing housing issues and homelessness. You've been an incredible partner to the county, and we are always excited for opportunities to deepen the collaboration we have with West Hollywood. So I think because Jen covered a lot of what we're doing under Measure H, I'll talk a little bit about specifically what Supervisor Kuehl's office is focused on. As many of you know, Supervisor Kuehl was elected in November 2014, and it was the homeless count in 2015, which really got, I think, everyone in the region very focused on homelessness, because we could all see that homelessness was increasing, but it was that 2015 count where we got pretty devastating numbers about how drastic the increase in homelessness in the region is, which led to the creation of the Homeless Initiative that Jen went over, and then the passage of Measure H. Measure H is a 10-year funding source for the Homeless Initiative, but I want to emphasize that in addition to what we're doing under Measure H, the county has many other ways that we're addressing homelessness, whether it's through our Department of Health Services, our Department of Mental Health, our Department of Children and Family Services, Department of Public Social Services. We also, before the Homelessness Initiative was adopted, made a commitment to build towards investing $100 million annually in affordable housing in the county, and that funds housing not only in unincorporated areas, but also in our cities in the county. So a big commitment through Measure H, but also through our ongoing efforts. In our office for Supervisor Kuehl, as we're moving into our fourth year, the supervisor is moving into her fourth year in office, we're starting to look at how to ensure that our investments are having the biggest impact, and we're really focused on 5 key strategies. The first is around evaluating the homeless system and how it's performing, specifically how we're moving the needle on the ratio of people getting placed into permanent housing and exiting homelessness versus the inflow into homelessness. We've been increasing people who are exiting homelessness steadily. I'll try again. So we've been increasing placements, but the inflow has been overwhelming us. And so it's really critical to be seeing how the system's performing against that ratio. And to that point, we're very focused on decreasing the inflow into homelessness. And we really feel that key to that is increasing affordable housing options for people, because what we see in the demographics of the homeless count is that it's really economics pushing people into homelessness right now. We're seeing pretty significant shifts in who's experiencing homelessness. So we're really focused on affordable housing options, and tenant protections as another way to prevent people from falling into homelessness. Our office has also been very focused on expanding treatment for people with severe mental illness. While that's only a subset of people who experience homelessness, often it's our most tragic cases, is our folks who are out there because of severe mental illness. Fourth, we're really looking at how to expand resources to protect people who experience domestic violence, intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking from falling into homelessness. And lastly, we're very focused on just siting. To make the investments that are available through Measure H, to make it work, we need to expand where people can go. That's everything from shelters to permanent supportive housing. We'd really like to cite a sobering center in our district. We'd like to cite safe parking. We're just sort of desperate for safe places for people to sleep. Ultimately, a permanent home is the way that people get out of homelessness, but we also need safe places for them to sleep while we're navigating them to permanent housing. And that takes siting, which is a very difficult conversation about where to put housing and shelters, but one that's incredibly important. And so we're dedicating a lot of our energy towards that. I want to just say, in terms of the City of West Hollywood, like I said, you've been a great partner. We're really excited that you've got a planning grant through Measure H. There are certain strategies that we think, you've already made a big commitment to housing. We hope that you'll continue that commitment. We're exploring alternative methods to create affordable housing, things like accessory dwelling units. you're ahead of most of us in terms of having inclusionary zoning and rent stabilization, and the county needs to catch up with you, and we're looking at our unincorporated areas and how we can be more like West Hollywood, but we're also looking at creative alternatives beyond inclusionary zoning and rent stabilization, like ADUs, like tenant protections and eviction defense. Again, whatever we can do to keep people in permanent housing so they don't fall into homelessness. And I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleen from LASA, which everyone has heard of, but a lot of people don't know what LASA is and what you do, so
Great.
help us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Colleen Murphy, and I am LASA, the LA Homeless Services Authority. We are a city and county partnership, so we are neither city, neither county, but both. So we do a few things. First of all, we administer some of the funds through Measure H to our partner agencies. We also ourselves have outreach teams that work with cities like the city of West Hollywood. And we also do a lot of work around the coordinated entry system to try to make all the pieces fit together throughout the county. So we do a number of activities. Today, I'll be wearing the hat around the work that I do every day, which is the coordinated strategy around outreach. And I'm here both wearing that hat as well as a longtime citizen of the city of West Hollywood. I've lived here 10 years, and it's always such a pleasure to be here because I'm always very proud of the work that this city does, the investment that it's made in its people, including our homeless neighbors, and you truly are a beacon for the rest of our county. So in terms of the coordinated outreach strategy, it's very exciting the amount of outreach that's happening in the city of West Hollywood. Seeing the work that's being done on a daily basis by your partner agencies is absolutely remarkable. And it's really actually one of the models we're trying to package and bring about through the rest of the county. And under E6, the coordinated outreach strategy, there's a few components that are actually going to help the work that the city of West Hollywood is already doing. The first is creating coordination. Outreach that's not coordinated sometimes can do more harm than good. So also we know that the city, the borders between the city of West Hollywood, Hollywood, Beverly Hills, they're permeable. And so if outreach is not strong in other areas, it could actually have a detrimental impact throughout the whole region. So we are taking a regional approach, and so bolstering outreach everywhere to make sure that we're able to really drive the resources where we need most. The other is through the investment in specialized teams that will augment the great work that's already being done through our called multidisciplinary teams. These are teams funded by Measure H through the Department of Health Services that have substance use professionals, mental health specialists, physical health specialists, nurses, nurse practitioners. So getting medical people out on the streets, that's quite a new thing, as well as just generalist people that know how to navigate the system. And so also through LASA's homeless engagement teams, which are generalists, we will also have a team that will be able to support. I know they're working a lot with the sheriff's department already. And so that will be an important piece, as well as coordination. This region is Service Planning Area 4, and we have actually 3 coordinators that are helping to do the work in this area. So it's creating a safe haven for outreach workers to work, to think through some of these challenges, as well as the connections to the other resources, because as we grow, more shelter beds, more permanent housing, we want to get people to those connected as quickly as possible. And many of those are outside of this area, so how can we make this network beyond the 90046 and 69 zip code? So it's going to take a lot of work. The other piece too is creating a centralized request for outreach portal that we're beta testing right now, where anybody from concerned citizens to law enforcement can put in a request for outreach, and that will get funneled to the appropriate outreach teams depending on where the request was and the nature. So that will be an important function too. And lastly is training. The work of outreach workers is absolutely probably one of the most, arguably the most challenging functions of this work. And so making sure our outreach workers, no matter the agency or entity or t-shirt worn, that they all have access to really good training and networking. I will end there.
Thank you. We got a chance to hear from one of our workers from the Gay and Lesbian Center on the video, and now we have Natalie on the panel from Essentia. You do both outreach for us and you provide shelter beds. So tell us a little bit about the work you're doing for the city of West Hollywood under our social services contract.
Okay, I'm happy to do so. So as you mentioned, Essentia is based actually in Glendale, and we were initially uncertain about whether it worked for us to come this far to West Hollywood, but I think we've been really delighted that we did this because I think it's made us a better organization. We always believed that we were a diverse and inclusive organization. This has made us even more so. We operated a street outreach team. Zoshi and JD are outreach workers, and then we have Joseph, who's here as a case manager to support the folks who are being we work to transition them from the streets into their own home. As you know, this does take some time, and having a dedicated case manager to support that work takes the pressure off the case managers who are doing the street outreach. We do encourage people to come to the Glendale shelter. The challenges we face with that is that it is a bit of a distance. The shelter also serves family with children, so people who are actively using drugs and alcohol are not going to be a good fit for that program. And for that, we've had lower than target. We've missed our targets on those goals. We've exceeded our goals in other areas of outreach, but it's been a little more challenging to bring people to Glendale. But when we have, it's been a really positive experience. And I think one of the things that's important to note is that we use a trauma-informed care in our programs. And as you noted in the video, that the people that we're finding on the streets tend to come from a history of trauma. They carry a lot of wounds with them, and it's important to have an environment where they feel safe. For those that do come out to Glendale, I think in some ways they've been pleasantly surprised. And I think it's been important for them to see that they could find safety outside of West Hollywood. As much as possible, we want to return them to West Hollywood for permanent housing, but that is a challenge that, as you know, is facing everyone in this community who has very low incomes. We see ourselves as being a part of the infrastructure of a community as much as police and fire. And I think that over the years, when we talk about planning for homelessness, a lot of the planning has been driven by urgency. And in that urgency is this notion that we're going to fix it quickly. This happened in the late 1980s when they put it under FEMA. It happened later when we talked about 10-year plans to end homelessness. And we're seeing it now with Measure H, which has a huge amount of momentum to do a lot of good. But I fear that if we don't talk about building infrastructure for the long haul, we miss this opportunity to create something in our communities that will address a need that will continue to be there. I think Molly spoke about this inflow. This inflow is our neighbors who experience personal crises. Those personal crises are very hard to predict at times, and I think when we look at a prevention model, we're only going to reach a fraction of those people. So in having a response to homelessness, we see our role as providing a safe place, reaching people where they are, and then making sure that we can work them through all the processes, all the paperwork that they need to fulfill, all of that to get into permanent housing, and then provide them the support that they need in their own home to remain housed. So we're very happy to be part of your community, and I look forward to answering any questions later if need be.
Simon?
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. I'm very happy to be here. I'm Simon Costello with the Los Angeles LGBT Center. I'm Director of Children, Youth and Family Services. We run a program supported by the City of West Hollywood to provide support to LGBTQ youth who are experiencing homelessness. And I just want to say a few points about that. And also talk about, we are obviously a collaborator with everybody at the table here. We also, under the Los Angeles Homeless Initiative, we are the regional coordinator for the Youth Coordinated Entry System. That's a little bit of a mouthful. But in addition to serving the population that we serve, we also work very closely with LASA and the other providers to help coordinate the services for all youth in this service planning area. We touched on it there briefly, and I want to build on what Jake said earlier about in his video. Last year when they did the homeless count, they did a separate count for youth, and they found that a full 33% of youth experiencing homelessness were in Service Planning Area 4, which is, West Hollywood, Hollywood, and downtown. And we know from our own data and our own research that 40% of those young people identify as LGBTQ. And when we talk to the young people that we serve at the centre, the primary reason these young people are homeless is disconnection from family. When we ask the reason, the youth that we serve, what are the reasons they left home, a full 50% say they were forced to leave home because they're LGBT, or they chose to leave home because it was an unsafe or an abusive environment. And I just want to make that point because I do think that it's important to recognize that youth experiencing homelessness, and particularly LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness, have very different experience and a very different trajectory into homelessness than perhaps adults. And they also, there's different reasons they're homeless, and perhaps the services need to be nuanced, and the services to, the solutions to their homelessness are slightly different. Most of the youth that we see, lack the building blocks to live a full and productive life. They have not had some of the mentors or some of the support in their early lives to build the supports that would allow them to live independently. So our job is to provide those building blocks and help the youth reach their full potential. And that is why there is separate programming for youth, and that's why there's a separate youth coordinated entry system. So over at the centre we see about 1,250 young people a year. 20% or so identify as West Hollywood clients when they come in, but I dare say that many, if not all of them, spend some time in West Hollywood. I mean, we're on the borders of West Hollywood. 30% are former foster youth. 30% have no high school diploma or GED. So we tend to focus a lot of our programming on, obviously, housing, emergency, transitional housing, rapid rehousing, but we also put a lot of emphasis into our education and employment program, which is obviously supported here by the City of West Hollywood. We have about 62 beds right now in our program. We have a seven-day-a-week drop-in centre. Next year we're moving to our new campus. We're very pleased that we're doing that, and obviously Measure H and various other funding streams will help us do that, where we will have a youth academy where we will take our education, employment and youth development programming and just do more intentional programming around the youth development and youth education and employment to help these young people get the skills they need to live independently. And we're also going to increase our housing stock to 125 units between emergency, transitional and some supportive housing. So we're looking forward to doing that. I'm happy to ask questions later. Thank you.
That's great. We've heard from two of our providers. I guess we'll now turn to our third here, Ted from Step Up on Second. Are you next, or?
We're going to go this way.
Oh, we're going to the
Yes,
sheriff's
we can
next.
go to
Okay.
Captain Aloma.
No one told me the order.
No one told me either.
Okay. Well, you're on the spot now.
Hello, everyone. For those that don't know me here on the council, on the panel, I am Sergio Loma. I'm the captain of the local sheriff station here in West Hollywood. Thank you for having us here tonight and be part of this important conversation. The sheriff station here locally over the past few months has partnered with our county and city counterparts in order to address homelessness in our community. This, we can all agree, is a complex issue that no doubt requires complex solutions. This problem, as we all know, and has been mentioned previously, is not isolated to West Hollywood. It's a regional problem. And quite frankly, many of the solutions that I think we're all looking for go beyond the scope of traditional law enforcement strategies and policing. To that end, and to state the obvious, the homeless in our community, as in all communities, we want to ensure that they enjoy the same constitutional protections that all of us enjoy as we engage with them here in West Hollywood and everywhere on a daily basis. To that end, the Sheriff's Department is committed to a compassionate approach that treats all people with respect while building trust. One of the things that we have encountered probably in our daily interactions here in West Hollywood is the trust issue that our homeless population experiences with, as I mentioned earlier, traditional policing tactics or strategies that, quite frankly, don't work long-term with this particular population. And we are experiencing that now, appreciating it, and educating and training our deputies on how to more effectively deal with and engage this population. Over the last year, the West Hollywood Sheriff Station has been in the process of sending all our deputies and supervisors through a comprehensive crisis intervention training, or SIT as it's called, in order to provide our personnel with the tools and training necessary to engage, as I said, this very challenging population, many of whom, as we all know, suffer from mental illness, drug addiction, among other things. This past year, starting in about September of 2017, members from our station's COPS team, which Corey mentioned earlier, is our community-oriented policing and problem-solving team. Our COPS team, in addition to our Sheriff's Department's Community Partnership Bureau host team, which is our homeless outreach services team led by Lieutenant Jeff Dietrich, who's here tonight, have gone out and engaged our homeless population in a series of focused outreach efforts. During those outreach efforts, we've contacted well over 140 homeless persons living in West Hollywood. We've transported or assisted in transporting some of those folks to housing, transporting them to treatment centers, and many others have sought other services. What we've learned is, as I said, it's a very challenging population to engage, and many of them are service resistant. So even though we've been doing outreach and reaching out to these folks on, as I said, a daily basis, we still are trying to overcome the hurdle of building trust and getting them to engage in services that are provided through the various service providers that are here tonight. For those residents and business owners that call us on a regular basis about crime related to homeless, some of the comments that I've made does not mean that we do not realize that some in our homeless population do also commit crimes in addition to being homeless. Some of the numbers that we shared a couple weeks ago at a previous council meeting was our arrest statistics as it relates to our homeless population, specifically here in West Hollywood. Last year, 2017, 320 persons who indicated they were homeless were arrested for a variety of offenses, and that includes felonies, misdemeanors, and of course local ordinances. To put that number into perspective, in 2015 and 2016 combined, we arrested 303. So we arrested more people, homeless individuals in 2017 than 2015 and 2016 combined. That being said, I certainly do not think that arresting the homeless is a solution, and I don't think we can arrest ourselves out of this this issue. So I'm very much looking forward to engaging with our partners here tonight and finding a solution that's more viable and helpful to our community moving forward. So thanks for having us.
Thank you. Lieutenant Ramirez.
Good evening. My name is Lieutenant Ed Ramirez, and I am the Service Area Lieutenant assigned to the City of West Hollywood. Prior to coming to the City of West Hollywood, for approximately 5 years, I served as the head of the Community Transition Unit, which is a reentry arm of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, assisting men and women leaving the care and custody of the Los Angeles County jail system. Part of what we did once they left was provide them with wraparound services and case management services. Having worked in a series of successful programs in dealing with the homeless, I'm a huge proponent and advocate of preventive homeless services. That said, as law enforcement officials, we have to find that healthy balance between the rights of the homeless people and the quality of life of people who live, work, and visit the City of West Hollywood. That's going to be our largest task.
Lieutenant Dietrich.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. I'm Lieutenant Jeff Dietrich. I'm currently the lieutenant that oversees the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Homeless Outreach Services team. Our team is a support element for all the patrol stations and for the rest of the department as subject matter experts on areas relating to homelessness. Those who are experiencing homelessness, as they come into contact with law enforcement, they see a new type of policing. One of the things with our decriminalization policy is getting that word out to our personnel and to those who we interact with. My team has 8 deputy sheriffs. We have 2 per patrol division, and one of our main responsibilities is doing training at the station level. Due to Captain Aloma's leadership, we've deployed 4 times now in West Hollywood. And what we found was that the deputies that work on the cops teams that are currently here, that our partnership furthers the collaboration, not only between us, but with our collaborative partners. And partners a big word to us, because those who we serve with out in the public, as we interact with those who are experiencing homelessness, they see the partnership between us and the service providers, and it's different. And it's unique. It's not going to change. It's going to get better as we go. But that partnership we found has taken someone who might be mistrustful of law enforcement to now shake their hand instead of show us their hand. And so that's kind of what our team's about. It's that compassionate approach that the captain referenced, along with our decriminalization policy, along with the collaborative bridge that we offer between those who are experiencing homelessness and the partners that need to help them. We can only do so much, but what we found is we're a positive light in that interaction, and we've seen the benefit already in our deployments here and throughout the county. One of the things also is our team is very integral in that first responder training. And I can tell you, I've been on 27 years. When I was a young deputy, we didn't have this training. The CIT training that the captain alluded to, it's awesome. And it's something that it's a fresh perspective. It's providing deputies and sergeants and lieutenants that work the field with this knowledge that we were never given. And so I teach it's about a 2-hour block. It's the first responder training relating to those who are experiencing homelessness and the positive influence law enforcement can have on that interaction. And it's pretty cool to see. And so as we build our collaborative bridge with our partners, many of the people sitting across from me are people we work with every day. So when we deploy here, it's just not deputies going out in the street. It's collaboration with all of our outreach partners. When we came here, we had 7 or 8 people from the Department of Mental Health. We had our outreach partner from Essentia, from LASA, Tarzana. There was multiple outreach groups that came and deployed in the same car with deputy sheriffs. And those who we came across with at first, and there's a few in the audience today that I spoke to out front that we met on those deployments that were kind of, that was weird. Well, this is real. And so we hope to build on that, and we thank you for having us in your area. Thank you.
Thank you, Shayla. Did I say that right?
You did. Thank you very much. So my name is Shayla Myers. I'm an attorney with the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles. I don't often have the opportunity to sit next to law enforcement and talk about these strategies. The Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles deals with people who are homeless or people who are on the verge of homelessness in a variety of areas. We work with people in eviction defense. We work with people who are seeking to obtain benefits to stay out of homelessness or to move out of homelessness. And we also work with people who are currently homeless and who are facing restrictions on their civil rights. That is one of the areas of law that I primarily am engaged in, is working with people who are facing restrictions on their civil rights because of what has been, unfortunately, a wave of law enforcement as a primary tool to address homelessness. And we have been very pleased with the County of Los Angeles and its decriminalization platform as part of the Homelessness Initiative. I'm very happy to hear for the City of West Hollywood and the Sheriff's Department that law enforcement is seen as a partner with social services rather than a replacement for social services, and that everyone around this table, it seems, is acknowledging that law enforcement cannot be the solution to homelessness. Also, that there are long-term approaches to addressing homelessness, and that while people are in homelessness and while people are dealing with being actively homeless and waiting for these solutions to take effect, right? Waiting for Measure H and the local agencies to fulfill our obligations to people who are homeless, that individuals who are homeless, that their constitutional rights are protected. As there have been a wave of increased reliance on law enforcement, unfortunately, there's also been a wave of an increase in the diminishing recognition of people's constitutional rights who are homeless. And there has been a wave of lawsuits around the country, here in California, about the ways in which law enforcement have dealt with people who are homeless, have dealt with their individuals' property rights. Courts across the country have been very clear that people who are homeless have constitutional rights. They have constitutional rights to their property. They have constitutional rights to engage in the type of life activities that all of us have to engage in, whether or not they are homeless or whether or not they are housed. So I think it's very encouraging that the City of West Hollywood is including this piece of that as part of the conversation, is including Sheriff's Department personnel who acknowledge from the outset that there are constitutional issues at stake here. Those are the kinds of conversations that have to be part of any conversation that is related to people who are unhoused on our streets. So thank you for including that as part of the conversation, and I look forward to the wider conversation.
Now to you, Ted.
I'm Todd Lipka, the CEO for Step Up on Second.
Sorry.
Not at all, not at all. Step Up, as you may know, as we've talked about the homeless population, it's not a homogeneous population. And HUD actually separates it into homeless and chronically homeless. And the HUD definition is a year or more, but even in the chronically homeless, it's a very diverse population. And Step Up is a mental health agency that focuses on the most chronically homeless, the people who have been on the street the longest, who have a serious mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar, and it's really the culmination of years of lack of support and treatment that led to a life of homelessness and a lack of treatment for their mental health issues. We are also focused on permanent supportive housing and using a method called Housing First, which is really a consumer-driven choice to say, instead of making you go through barriers of emergency housing or go into a shelter or transitional housing, we really want to partner with you from day one on the street when we engage you into going into permanent supportive housing. Because we believe, especially for that chronically homeless population, if you have services without housing, you're really just perpetuating someone's problem. And if you have housing without services, you're really setting them up for failure. So for us, the answer is, how do you create homes for people and then wrap those homes in rich supportive services? So for the past 16 months, as we've worked and been embedded in your community, we've housed 11 individuals into permanent supportive housing. And we do this through a method of the city-funded services leverage the programs that Jen and Molly talked about, which are county-funded. So Step Up has significant county-funded services through the Department of Mental Health, Department of Health Services, and others. And those are rich supportive services combined with vouchers or rental subsidies, because these individuals are all low income and they need that voucher to supplement their rent. So the engagement of our team, led by Cliff Roberts, sitting over there, working with our county-funded intensive case management programs. So your city dollars to us actually leverage county resources to be able to combine that and get the Cliff's and his team's work. We're engaging people, and I know for some of the people we house, we've engaged them for a couple years before they get to the point that they're ready for housing. Not that they're housing ready from day one, it's that they're not ready because they've suffered a lifelong trajectory of disappointments of the system. Interactions with the various systems that have been unresponsive to their needs of a home and set up all these obstacles for them, these hoops for them to jump through before they could ever be considered for housing. So Cliff's team really is, it's not outreach, it's engagement, because it's really thinking of partnering from day one on the street of going into housing and getting a housing resource. Step Up works with a variety of communities very similar to your Santa Monica, Beverly Hills, where housing is just terribly challenging. You know, if I could, we also have our own housing projects. We have about 13 of them throughout the county. I could build one permanent supportive housing project and house every single chronically homeless individual in your community, if I could build a housing project here. So what we have to do is take the voucher which comes from LASA or from some other source and work with that individual. COAST team engages them, interacts with our more intense case management and teams with them, works with the individual on what their preferences are in terms of where they want to live and the services that they need, and has to, unfortunately, in many cases, place them, in most cases, almost all cases, outside the city of West Hollywood, because that's the only place where the landlord would be willing to take what the voucher pays for the rent. But we know the system works, and we know that homeless individuals, even people who have been on the street for decades, they want housing, and in fact, the vast majority, 90% of the people that we place retain their housing year after year. So the system works, and it's just a matter of finding the resources and the solutions to make that work.
Great, thank you. Corey?
I just wanted to add one more piece. We mentioned the planning grant from the county, and tonight's session will be one of the pieces that informs that plan. And our consultant for that project is here tonight and listening to everything you're all saying and what we'll hear from the public as well, Abby Arnold. And so she'll be at a lot of community meetings. She's already been out and about collecting information to help inform that plan. So I just wanted to share that as well. And with that, we'll turn it over to you for council discussion.
I know that some of the information that has been provided is new to council. Some of it is information that we were already aware of. But part of the reason we wanted to do this study session was also to inform the public of the array of services that we provide and the approach of the different agencies that we work with in addressing the issues. Yvonne told me that we do have a couple of public speakers. How many do we have?
We have 4.
Do we want to hear the public comment first and then get into council discussion? So we don't have a monitor, so you'll have to read the names.
Esther Baum. You have 2 minutes.
And who's the next speaker, Yvonne?
Karen O'Keefe.
Okay.
Esther Baum, resident of West Hollywood. I live in an apartment building that has 2 studio apartments that I think are very well designed. It has a full kitchen with eating space for a table that seats 4. It has a living room where the couches can convert to a bedroom, and it has a dressing room with a wall of closets for hanging clothes and a wall with shelves for storage, and a full bathroom in a very small space. I think that people who are going to design, buildings should look at that. I think it's one of the best things I've ever seen, and we should have more of those studio units in West Hollywood. I also think we should build some buildings with those studio units on the veterans' property. I think it's a disgrace that that property is being used for other commercial uses and not for housing for veterans who need it, and then they'll be right next to medical and mental health facilities. That's my
Thank you.
hint.
Thank you. Karen? Who's
To be
after
followed
Karen?
by Clifford Roberts.
Hello again. I really appreciate everything that the city does to look at this issue from a place of compassion and the law enforcement training to really try to help people who are experiencing homelessness. I know it's easy to think of the homeless as others, and that so many times I see some comments of people that seem to wish they'd just go away, but I have a few friends that experienced homelessness and family member, and we live in a country without much of a social safety net and no national health care, and really for many of us, there but for the grace of God go I. So I wanted to thank you, and also I wanted to mention Ms. Ryman had brought up the issue of siding, and there are a few specific things she brought up, and I wonder
in our city, of all places, couldn't we consider some of these things? Safe parking. I think Steve Lopez of the LA Times wrote there's nowhere in the county that's volunteered a church parking lot for people to park their cars safely at night, which means there's nowhere in our city either. Is that something we could do? Emergency shelter, I think I hear that we're shipping people, taking them to Glendale to a wonderful facility, but that doesn't meet the needs of anywhere. We could use emergency shelter here as well, I think. I don't think we have any 24-hour bathrooms. It's great that we have some showers and other services, but I wonder where homeless people are supposed to use the restroom in the middle of the night. One thing that piqued my concern was the mention of faith-based funding, and where in some cases it might be wonderful. You know, unfortunately, a lot of faith-based institutions have discriminated against LGBT people, Q people, and I'm wondering if we have provisions in to make sure that our money isn't being used for any discriminatory institutions, and I certainly hope that would be the case. And then anyone who's interested in, there's an organization that I volunteered with for a few years called Schools on Wheels that matches up tutors with homeless children, because so many children who are homeless have interruptions in their education and could really use help. And they set up tutors. I don't know if they work with the LGBT Center here, but they're a wonderful organization. So if anyone's interested, I encourage you to check it out. So thanks again to the city, and maybe we can do even more.
Thank you.
Clifford Roberts, to be followed by Matt Gill.
Well, you know, listening to all these speakers, I thought how fortunate our community is to have such amazing providers, and I was trying to think what I could add to the conversation, and what had occurred to me. And before I start, I want to call someone out. I actually worked with Shayla Myers a couple of years ago, helping somebody who was being evicted, who had been chronically homeless, and we were able to successfully intervene and get that person permanent supportive housing. As a therapist, meeting people where they're at with compassion, using language that is inclusive, and coming really, I think all importantly, from a place of radical acceptance and empathy and sincerity is really the beginning place. That's really with the nexus of homelessness and being housed. That's the opportunity where I can do the best work. And so it is providing therapy on the street, using our city as one of the characters and our folks' wellness, and then pivoting and finding practical ways in which to get them services. We've worked with Essentia, the Sheriff's Department, various other agencies, some private organizations, in trying to find innovative and creative ways to assist people who are actually very creative and unique in this particular community, and really having some sense of background and knowledge of what these consumers have gone through, the historical trauma as a community they've endured, along with individual trauma. Someone mentioned about LGBT individuals being extricated from their homes, and this really lives within an individual throughout their life. So as a therapist, I try to mitigate that trauma, try to really let them know that I am a person who is listening, meeting them where they're at, and going to be there without judgment. What a nice place to stop. Thanks everybody for being here, and I'm so happy to be able to work with the City of West Hollywood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt Gill, to be followed by Steve Martin.
All right, good evening. I'm Matt Gill. I'm the manager of the West Hollywood Library, and I just wanted to talk about and thank the City of West Hollywood for the social service providers who are located at the West Hollywood Library. So since November 2016, social services have been located at the library, and the current groups are Essentia, LA LGBT Center, Safe Refuge, Step Up on 2nd, Tarzana Treatment Center, and the Friends Community Center. The groups set up on the 2nd floor of the library in the West Hollywood room, and there they can meet with clients in a confidential area, as the library is a neutral place with no stigma attached. Unscientifically, I would say that at any given time, 20 to 30% of the people inside the library are homeless. I couldn't guess the number of people who are housing insecure, who are one missed paycheck away, one injury, one rent hike away from being homeless. But having these groups in the library allow people to receive help in a crisis situation before they do find themselves homeless. The library is a place to connect people with information and their community. And our statement of purpose is this: the library gives you the freedom to connect, explore, and create whatever your needs or dreams. So needs or dreams. And social services at the library allow us to serve people when their needs are the greatest, and maybe just possibly get them back to pursuing their dreams. So I do want to thank you for these services. Thanks.
Steve Martin, to be followed by David Dickerson.
Steve Martin, I'm here on behalf of the steering committee of the East Side Neighborhood Watch. We represent the area from Fuller over to Detroit. Our chair, Todd Holman, couldn't be here. As you know, we feel that we're very much on the front line of what's going on with the homeless situation, particularly on Detroit and Formosa, where we really have a problem where the homeless situation is not as benign as being presented. I mean, we have home invasions, car break-ins, people defecating on your lawns and your driveway. We live in an urban area. We understand we interact with homeless people. Scavenging, recycling is not a big deal. Panhandling is not a big deal. But we really appreciate the fact that you guys are looking out to find solutions, but we also need to make sure that our streets are safe. We just had over this weekend on Poinsettia Place, there was a home break-in with a potential squatter situation, and just last week I was talking to a friend of mine who was basically chased home by an aggressive panhandler who wouldn't leave until she started going up the steps of her apartment. I don't want to dwell on that. Todd Hallman, who wanted to be here, was hoping that we could talk about a homeless mentoring, particularly for homeless youth. And what I'm hoping is that when I know Blue Hibiscus is going to be opening soon in our neighborhood, that we can figure out some way to interact with them and budget and really integrate those kids from that program, the people in that program, into our neighborhood, because I think it'll be a big thing that would be really proactively positive for everyone. And so we just are hoping that we can count on your support to keep our neighborhoods and Plummer Park safe. Thank you.
David Dickerson, to be followed by Genevieve Morrill, who will be our last speaker.
I was going to say that's more than 4.
We received more. Wow.
Late add-ons. I'm David Dickerson from Kitchen 24. I'm the owner-operator of Kitchen 24, and as a business owner, I know there's plenty of non-benign aspects to the homeless situation, but I wanted to take the time to, over the last year, I've gotten involved with Corey Plank and tried to find my own way to help. And I just want to say that I've worked in other cities where I have businesses where the homeless issue is just as relevant, and it's very frustrating, and it's very, very difficult because you feel like you don't have much of a chance to make an impact. And I will say, just in my short time of working with the Sheriff's Department and with Corey and Essentia and LGBT and everybody else, that it is a breath of fresh air to find so much support. And it's been very, very, everybody should be very appreciative of all the work that the mayor and the council members do to provide this forum, and also to invite everybody here to help, because it is a breath of fresh air to feel like you can help. And I've been to the LGBT Youth Center and felt like I could look in somebody's eye and there's an opportunity there. So Corey's doing great work, and I just want to say thank you guys for providing the opportunity. Excuse me.
Genevieve Morrill.
Thanks. Genevieve Morrill, West Hollywood Chamber of Commerce President and CEO. Corey asked me to be here today, and even if she hadn't, it's fascinating. And I want to thank all of you. It's really humbling to stand up here and listen to all the selfless work that you all do. And I ditto what David said. It has been just night and day in terms of what's been happening right now with this issue. Back in 2016, the WHCC board, our board, number one objective was to help the homeless situation. A committee of about 8 to 12 of our members was formed: Anna Walt Lumber, McDonald's, Sunset Marquee, Kitchen 24, West Hollywood Gateway, Phyllis Morris, and some non-brick and mortar, such as security company Prodigy, public safety commissioners, sheriffs, block by block, et cetera, to help look and find solutions and how the business community to help. We worked with donations and resources for LGBT Youth Center, professional clothing drives, hygiene products for Essentia. We're working with the Business Connect Day, or the Homeless Connect Day, where businesses are donating haircuts and hygiene products and clothing as well. From day one, when Covenant House came to us, we helped connect them to Shake Shack, which hired 35 of their homeless youth. We've had interns and job programs and job training housing, that we connect with businesses and a lot of hotels that really want to do that. We've looked at re-education and communication alternatives with Corey and her team, and I want to thank social services for all the work they do as well. And a few of our members, like David and Rod Gruendijk, have toured facilities and brought in their team to have presentations to their employees. And we've also looked at some of the challenges that businesses have had, whether it's leasing or small fires by their back porch, or trying to work with the sheriffs. Businesses are challenged because they don't want to make an arrest, and I think some of the alternatives have only been that you have to arrest the person on your property if they don't go away. So we're really looking at trying to communicate, get the message out, and then try to connect businesses where we can to help provide resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. And now we'll turn to council questions and discussion. We had kind of assured people that we would try to be done about an hour and a half after we started at 7, which would put us right at 8:30, which is where we are now. So let's try to limit this for another half hour. And again, if any of our guests have to leave, we completely understand. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight. And why don't we start with you, Lindsay, because I just looked at you.
Right, that's a good reason.
We'll start with you, and let's try to limit our comments and questions to several minutes, and that way we can get through this in a timely manner.
I have a few comments and 4 questions. I first want to thank you all for being here. It's quite an impressive group. I appreciate the compliments that you paid to our city. We work very hard, and I think our council is united in this front of trying to address homelessness in the comprehensive way that our community expects us to. That being said, there are some very significant issues that we're experiencing in the community that we're hearing about, and so I guess my questions are really related to that. First of all, I saw in the slide presentation that the West Side City's COG, which includes West Hollywood, Beverly Hills, Santa Monica, Culver City, and West LA, was allocated $30,000 to address homelessness. What can you explain that $30,000 number, because that doesn't seem like it's going to go very far.
So the grants that were made are planning grants, so they're not services. So you're right. The scheme of homeless services is nothing. So these are just planning grants to help both cities and COGs think about the best way to plug into the county's homeless initiative. So our efforts are much, much larger. But those grants are really for communities to think about what strategies make sense for them, and then think about how to collaborate with the county on those strategies.
Okay. My second question, you had mentioned, Todd, is that right? That you had housed 11 individuals since you started working with West Hollywood. Can you give me some context for that? Like, is that a good number? Is that a significant number? Is that a low number?
It's actually a great number, because some of these individuals were probably very well known to law enforcement, been on the street for a very long time. And so if we take 8 years average, which I know 2 of the individuals we housed were homeless for 8 years, it's about a century of homelessness that was solved with those individuals. And I'm not up on your current numbers of what your census is, but it's a significant percentage, especially for a city that doesn't really have housing resources.
So that's actually leads into my next question. Since all of you work in services in this area every day, I'm curious to know, a lot of what was suggested in the slide is stuff that our city's already doing. So what is it that we're missing? What is it that you would suggest we need to be doing more or better or differently that we're not doing? Because I feel like, part of the frustration is we feel like we're investing a lot, we're doing all the things that were advised are our best practices, and we're still experiencing what feels like an increase in intensity of this problem. So what would you suggest we do?
I'll just say, the housing crisis is very significant, and I think we all feel the same way and you are ahead of the pack, as I said, but how we respond to the housing crisis is requiring us to do more, to think about how to site more, whether it's siting more permanent supportive housing, affordable housing, shelters. You've been a great city and a great leader, but I think we're all having to, just roll up our sleeves and think of anything we can do. Do we have any underutilized land? I was out looking at a county site in the West Valley today thinking, that's 1 story. What if we went 4 stories? Is there any, looking at every single site we can to try and figure out what can be done. And I know it is challenging, but I encourage you to try and be creative. And to work with communities. We had certain communities where it felt like we're never going to get affordable housing in that community because the neighbors and the constituents there just won't support it, and we're having to sort of rethink a lot of our assumptions about where we can do this and revisit conversations with communities that are uncomfortable. But, a lot of times if we do a really meaningful dialogue, we can get to a place where we can all agree that we just need more of everything right now, unfortunately.
Anyone else? Okay.
I just want to add, is this on? Certainly permanent housing, but the fact you don't have any emergency shelter in this vicinity is, I think, a real problem. And what we're finding is the more acutely troubled people aren't going to make it over to Glendale. Our shelter is not going to be a good fit for them. I think that if you look at the trajectory of your city's growth and your population, you say, what % of our population might be experiencing an intense mental health crisis or some other kind of health crisis that would put them at risk of losing their housing or being on the streets, you might be able to forecast a need for shelter for a considerable number of years moving into the future. So I know that it's not the thing that people like to talk about, building shelter, but it helps. It's such a phenomenal tool for helping support the engagement that Todd was talking about, the engagement that we use. It gives us an opportunity to bring others to support the program. That's what we do at Essentia with the food. It's totally provided by volunteers. So you can use shelter as a great engagement tool as well. It doesn't have to be a big mega structure that's has a host of problems. It could be a very nurturing place that's scaled appropriately for your community that would really be an asset for folks who are in dire need of it.
And if I may add, one other piece is rapid rehousing is a very important piece of the puzzle too, on top of shelter and permanent supportive housing. And so doing landlord engagement, I'm not sure how much the city is doing around educating just regular mom and pop landlords about how they can tap into rapid rehousing and put aside a few units to help people who just need a little step up and will be able to pay their rent like you and I on a monthly basis with some of those supports. And it's a great intervention for our youth, as well as people who just fell into homelessness due to loss of a job, a health crisis, or things like that.
I would just emphasize what Colleen said, which is to engage local landlords in the city of West Hollywood who may be interested in providing a unit, knowing whether it's rapid rehousing, which is more of a short term, but for permanent supportive housing, the guarantee that services will be coming into the unit on a regular basis.
And my last question, we've spoken in a way that I'm very proud of in terms of being compassionate and progressive in how we're approaching this and being service oriented. But I also want to acknowledge the extreme frustration that our community is facing too. I think it would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that that's what people are feeling. And so for me, the word that I've really started to focus on with regard to homelessness is responsiveness. I think people need to see see their calls being responded to, see people out there delivering those services. So if you could talk a little bit about what responsiveness looks like for each of your agencies, what we can expect of you, and how we can expect that you are going to be responsive to the calls that our community is putting out, because they're feeling, some are expressing, I just got an email from someone who has chosen to move out of the city because their children every day were going out to see, someone going to the bathroom in their front yard or performing a sex act in their front yard. And so they, it's a problem. And we need to acknowledge that that's a real problem, and something needs to be done. So what does responsiveness look like, and what are the expectations that we can have around responsiveness to these issues?
I'd be happy to respond a little bit, but I do want to acknowledge that a couple of the public speakers, acknowledge that there are still some challenges on the east side of West Hollywood. But this, as regards the youth homelessness, I think this matter was a lot worse maybe 2 years ago, and the city reached out to us, and some of the neighbours reached out to us, and we instituted a lot more outreach activities in those areas, and try to work with the young people who may be causing some of these disruptions and try and engage them in our services. And those that were engaged in our services, tell them politely they couldn't be engaged in our services if they weren't going to be good members of the community. So we have a community program at the youth centre where we try and educate all our young people that they are members of the community, be that members of the West Hollywood community or the Hollywood community, but they are members of the community, and that comes with it certain responsibilities. And if they want to get services and they want to be part of our community, that also means working with our neighbours and working with our neighbours around the youth centre. So we try very hard to educate them around that. Does it work with everybody? No, I would have to be honest and say, of course, it doesn't work with everybody, but I do think it works with many, and I do think the situation with the young people has improved. I do think the young people influence each other as well. So the more that we keep doing that, and the more that we can keep providing resources, I think the more we can improve that. And I hope we're responsive. I hope I want us to be. So if we're not, you've got to let me know that if we get a call, that we will get out there.
I'll jump in quickly and then have Natalie add to that. We get a number of calls or emails every day, and we send out messages to our outreach teams. They are responsive. Our city staff who are responding, from code compliance to public works, public safety, sheriffs. We're fielding a number of responses on a daily basis, and those teams are as quick as possible following up. Sometimes they're meeting with other clients when the request comes in. But they will schedule time with someone and meet them at the library during their service hours, or go and meet them again. It's challenging because sometimes when people call and say there's somebody here, they've left a message, we've talked to them, we've sent a team out, they expect that person will be gone from that location because they made the call or let us know, and that's just not realistic for some of the population we're dealing with. We know that folks are there. We have people trying to engage them in services, and I think, as Todd mentioned, sometimes it has taken. We know of some people who have been here for years who are now housed, but it took multiple contacts over years to get them into service. So just making us aware of the problem is really helpful, and we need that to continue so that we can continue to deploy our teams appropriately. But I think sometimes the frustration comes with the expectation that I let you know and that person is still there. And we understand that frustration, but we'll continue, and the teams have been really responsive. The COPS team has been really responsive as well. But I'll let Natalie add in.
I think you said it. I think, certainly responsiveness is important to us. And for the public, it's important to know that there's a mechanism to complain if they don't feel that we're being responsive. And we would like to be able to analyze why that is the case. And often it is because we're dealing with another client. It's a team of 2 people, and they've got other folks that they're also addressing. But we always want to know if there's a way we can improve it. Certainly we would do something to do that.
Mayor Pro Tem Duran wanted to jump in because he had some comments and questions.
But I promised John I'd be short, as short as I could possibly be.
That's not possible.
I know. That's why I said as short as I could possibly be. Yeah, I know. Beat me already. Thank you. I just wanted to join the conversation, and I'm going to make use of the experience I have in the criminal justice system, because I understand not all homeless are criminals. I understand not all homeless commit crimes, and I think it's a lot easier to rehouse those victims of domestic violence, or people who've lost a paycheck or a home, people who need immediate rehousing are a little easier to deal with. The ones that I think are more difficult to deal with are those with serious mental health issues, and especially on alcoholism and crystal meth being the latest villain in all this. So I'm going to focus, if I can, on that area because it's something I know a little bit about. The criminal justice system only works if there's a deterrent. These guys over here in uniform arresting somebody who commits a crime, not because they're homeless, but because there's a criminal victim. They'll end up in court, they'll be there for 3 or 4 days, they'll get credit time served, or a judge will give 30 days or 60 days, and depending on the severity of the misdemeanor or felony, they'll be out in 3 days. And there's no intervention that occurs. There's no attachment to services, there's no lining them up with mental health services, there's no even opportunity to find them housing or even a bed. And I think one of the components that's missing, and hopefully as the county continues to debate this, is the criminal justice system and the role of the courts. Now, we lost all our community courts. We lost the Hollywood court, we lost the Beverly Hills court, we lost the Bouchette courts. As part of court unification and the governor and the legislature deciding how to scale back, we lost all our community courts, and our community courts were a great place for individual attention to be given to issues like this. So I don't know what the long-term plans are, but the Hollywood Court, 5925 Hollywood Boulevard, Beverly Hills Court, the Bouchette Court, they're all available. They could be put to good use with some dedicated resources, using the city attorney, the district attorney, the public defenders, and private counsel to come up with homeless diversion programs, if necessary, come up with probationary terms and conditions, come up with sentences that give us an opportunity to have all these organizations intervene rather than just cycling people in and out. You probably all know Department 95, the mental health court, and I have clients there now, is so overburdened, we can't even get people in the Patton State Hospital for 6 months. It's so overburdened, people with serious mental health issues who are not even competent to stand trial, we can't even get them treatment. There's such a long waiting list. So systemically, we have a real problem in dealing with serious mental health and addiction that these guys they can't. They just can't. And so I'm hoping as this issue continues to develop that the county, the Board of Supervisors, because the courts fall partially under their jurisdiction, they're state courts, but county operated, look at perhaps taking some of these existing public facilities and reauthorizing them to deal with this particular part of a very complex puzzle. Otherwise, we don't get the intervention that's needed. And maybe there's stuff already happening. If you're going to tell me that, that's awesome. Because I think this is the place where the rubber finally hits the road, is the criminal justice system and the inadequacies that we're seeing.
I'll just say, I mean, we could have a whole separate forum just on the criminal justice system and mental health, which has been a very big issue for the county, and we're very fortunate to have Jackie Lacey as our district attorney, who's brought a lot of attention to this issue, and her blue ribbon report about this led to the creation of the county's Office of Diversion and Reentry, which has been a fantastic endeavor. It is not enough. I would never argue that we have enough resources, but we are starting to see some really great programs and efforts coming out of that. That's where the misdemeanor incompetent to stand trial community-based restoration program was sort of born in the Office of Diversion and Reentry. We don't control felony incompetent to stand trial, but we do have a choice over what we do with misdemeanor incompetent to stand trial, and we used to just try and restore them to sanity in the jail, and as you can imagine, the jail isn't the greatest place to be restored to sanity, and we've started a really robust program to bring people into the community, so not only do they get better treatment, mental health treatment, but they build relationships so that they'll hopefully continue in mental health treatment long after their case is out of the criminal courts. So that's been a great effort. We're also working really closely on releasing people to housing programs so that they're not, it's not just a revolving door back to the streets. And we have housed over 1,000 people through the Office of Diversion and Reentry. And Measure H is also a component of our work on the criminal justice justice side, funding our jail in-reach efforts, doing some really good work there. But there's a lot of work to do. We don't control the funding of the superior courts, and we are trying to figure out how to collaborate in the best way we can. Office of Diversion and Reentry is co-located with 2 courts now, one downtown, one in Compton, and they're collaborative courts. We'd like to see that model expanded, but we only have so much leverage. We are going to see Department 95 move to the Hollywood Courthouse at some point if the state ever approves the plans for the rehabilitation of that site. So there are some things happening, but there's a lot more that we'd like to see. Like I said, we could have a whole another forum just about the issues of the criminal justice system.
Thank you.
Of what you're asking about, it's strategy D2. In the homeless initiative, that's our jail in reach. And so within that jail in reach program, it's like my counterpart for inside the jail where I'm outside in the public. They have that program, and it's obviously, as we all are, ramping up, but that program that connects those who have identified as experiencing homelessness, that who are incarcerated as they're getting out and while they're in jail, they do connect them with service providers as we speak. I'm not the expert on that one, to what extent that goes, but I do know that system was put in place through the homeless initiative through strategy D2. So we are in a better position than we were, and as that ramps up, I think we'll see more success there.
Thank you.
And we actually fund shelter beds specifically for this population. They're called AB 109 beds, where if people have been released recently, these shelter beds are devoted to that population. Again, not enough, but they're really important tools. So those connections, when we know somebody's been released, we can put them in those beds and then start to work towards connecting them to the number of housing resources out there, because we know some of this criminality is like you said, based around substance use and just trying to make a living. And so if we can break that cycle, we can see some really important results.
And I just wanted to add to that, just to the aspect of using law enforcement as part of the outreach strategies. And I think sometimes that can be extremely dangerous for cities who are relying significantly on law enforcement to be responsive to people's complaints, to be used as a way to address the visible signs of homelessness. In those situations where cities around the state and around the country have turned to law enforcement to reduce the visible signs of homelessness, those are the situations where people's civil rights are easily violated. I think it's also important to note that where law enforcement becomes used as a primary outreach mechanism, that can have significant clinical implications. Where many of the people who are homeless have already had negative interactions with law enforcement, the suggestion that law enforcement is the primary mechanism by which a person gets connected to services, those services just become another tool of law enforcement rather than a way to move out of homelessness. So diversionary tools to get people out of the criminal justice system and into housing can actually be counterproductive. And also it can simply lead to the cycle of criminalization that we know is actually keeping people out of homelessness. So I think when you're looking at the reactions of the city of West Hollywood, I think moving away from law enforcement, moving away from criminalization, and moving away from the use of law enforcement, I think is really, really important. And I'd like to hope that that's how West Hollywood will continue.
Well, unless you're a victim of a crime. Then if you're a victim of a crime, we're moving law enforcement in. That's a distinction for me. Yeah.
So, Councilmember D'Amico has some questions and comments.
Thank you, Mayor. Very briefly, I want to just take a step back to the big picture just for a moment. I think we really focused on some important things, but I have a concern that we have an almost full employment economy, and I believe our homeless numbers last year were more than 45,000 and may find this year it's the same. So when the inevitable fall in the economy happens, I'm concerned that there will be an even larger increase in homelessness, and I think that's, for me, a big concern. And it sounds like, again, from way back, Measure H is about shaking hands and collaborating, and I haven't heard a single person talk about a goal. How many new housing units are we going to produce? What's the number of people that we expect to be homeless in 10 years after spending $3 billion? Is it 20,000 people, down from 45,000? Will we create 600 units, 6,000 units, 60,000 units? I think in the big picture, you know, West Hollywood does collaboration, and we love loving each other. But in some way, I think what our residents have said is, how do I help these people who are on my street, sleeping under a towel, get to something that resembles safety for them and peace of mind for me? And so now I want to dig back into the specific, which is that our drug and alcohol rehab beds, I think, are critical for this community. And however we can assist the county in moving people into drug and alcohol rehab, which we do, we spend lots of money on that. And secondarily, I want to throw out a sort of crazy idea that may hit as much cold water as is generatable, but I think perhaps our metro site could serve as a cold, wet weather shelter in the winter. Certainly, our park is now. If you leave this meeting and you walk into our park, you will find 10, 12, perhaps 15 people sleeping there tonight. And across the street is a sheriff's station, and behind that is a 10-acre site with a bus depot. It's perhaps not the best place to set up a tent for 5 months in the winter, but it might be the answer to your question about how we can have shelter, emergency beds here in our city. It might be a way to provide covered, maybe not necessarily beautiful or perfect, but you know, if the county is going to jump in and be a provider of care and services and housing, we do have a 10-acre site that houses 185 buses, I think, and not very many much beyond that. So those were the sort of bigger picture questions. If maybe somebody could address sort of what the goal in 10 years is and what the plan is for when the economy does tank and our unemployment rate doubles or more, and then sort of drug and alcohol rehab services, and whether a cold and wet weather shelter at the bus station is something we could perhaps have as a goal for next December.
And I'm happy to tackle a few of those. I'm not sure I can take on all four, but I'll start with the first parts that you asked about. So first of all, the goal for Measure H is to house 45,000 people and prevent 30,000 additional people from falling into homelessness. So there are some very concrete numbers associated with it, but I also want to caution folks around your expectations. And Councilwoman Horvath, when you were talking about somebody who is leaving West Hollywood because they don't want to interact with folks who are homeless, I'm not sure you can find a place on the West Coast today where you're not going to interact with people who are homeless. I want to be really clear, this is a national issue. And homelessness is dramatically increasing, particularly on the West Coast, because our housing costs are so extreme. And the real issue is that incomes are not keeping pace with housing costs. So even though we have really great employment numbers, we have wage stagnation. So we can have lots of people working, and we all work with lots of folks who are homeless and working, because you can have a full-time job in this economy and be nowhere near being able to afford rent. So unfortunately, even though the stock market's doing great and the employment numbers are great.
Not today.
Not today. Other days the stock market is great. Even though generally the economy looks like it's doing well, I think what most people know is what that means for money in people's pocket, particularly if you're not the uber wealthy. What it means for most of us is that the money in our pocket is not going as far as we need it to. And so we do have to be cautious about saying, because of this investment, homelessness is going to go down overall, because like I said, it's very hard to control that inflow into homelessness. That is not something I think the county is willing to say we can guarantee that there's going to be a 50% drop in homelessness because of this huge investment in resources, because if wages keep stagnating and housing costs keep going up, we're in big trouble. and there's only so much we can do. But we do have very clear goals in terms of how many people we want to house, how many people we want to prevent from becoming homeless. So I'll also just quickly mention on drug and alcohol beds, huge issue. We are fortunate that we got a drug Medi-Cal waiver in the county, which is giving us some additional resources, and there's been a lot of redesign of the drug and alcohol system, and also thinking very clearly, we want more people to go into treatment, but also being clear what happens after treatment, because I think that's where our system was really failing for a long time, is where do you go after treatment? You could go into a sober living home. A lot of people can't even afford a sober living home. We're now funding Recovery Bridge housing, so that there is a much clearer path out of treatment and into stability. And we're also, on the other end, ensuring that we have substance abuse professionals who are embedded in our multidisciplinary outreach teams, because it is a unique system, and it takes people with a lot of expertise to help navigate people into that system and support them as they're getting into drug and alcohol treatment.
Could you maybe, from the supervisor's office point of view, discuss whether a cold, wet weather shelter at a metro site is something you would consider or at least look at?
Yeah, I mean, we are desperate for anywhere we can do beds. And as you were saying that, I was thinking I need to ask Metro to give me a tour of the bus depot, because I've driven by it many times, so I've never actually gone inside. So I think we would be very open to talking to Metro and touring the site and seeing what's possible there.
I'll just add to some of the goals. So the goal that Molly mentioned about the 45,000 exiting out of homelessness is just in the first 5 years. So, and then for the housing, the PSH MOU has a goal of building 10,000 units of PSH over 10 years. So while the core of Measure H and the Homeless Initiative is collaboration and partnership, let me assure you that Measure H has some serious teeth and is intensely data-driven. So there's also many layers of oversight and evaluation from third parties. So data is really driving a lot of the decisions and discussions around how we develop our programs and policies. So numbers, how many housed, how many served.
Thank you very much.
With all the reports that we have to do, I can concur with that.
Yes, you can.
So, Councilmember Meister and myself have served on the council's homelessness subcommittee, so I saved us for last. I'm going to turn to my colleague on the subcommittee for any comments or questions.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm having trouble reconciling how we have a count of 105 in 2017, and yet we have 300 arrests. So are those arrests, of those 105 people, are they the same people getting arrested multiple times? Where are all these homeless people? Are our counts totally off? I mean, are we looking at really something 3 times what we're counting?
Well, and I do, I'm going to turn this over to the captain, but I just want to say in terms of count methodology, the homeless count is a point-in-time count, which means it's one night out of 365 days in a year. So you do see many more people. We generally estimate it is about 3 times what you see on any given night over the year, because people go in and out of homelessness. You have some people who are chronically homeless who are there for the whole year, but actually the majority of people go in and out of homelessness. So it is not a representative number of how many people are homeless in your city in 365 days. And of course, you have people coming into your city who may not be sleeping here at night, but are here during the day as well. So I'll turn it over to the captain with that.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I couldn't have explained it better. It is, as mentioned, a point-in-time count. So that's what we have to keep in mind. The city of West Hollywood is 1.9 square miles, as we know. So these people come and go from Hollywood to the Wilshire area, even though they don't want to admit it, into Beverly Hills and other surrounding areas. So 320 when we have 105 in a point-in-time count over the course of 365 days, I think is indicative of the fact that they are transient, they are mobile, and they are moving from a larger geographic area.
Okay, I think that's something that we have to consider when we're looking at our services, because I think a lot of us think, oh, 105, that's not so, that's not the worst number you can have. You could have 57,000, but it's really much more than that. So I think that is something that we need to look at. I'm just going to put some things out there, and just, I'm a believer in not reinventing the wheel, and these are some things that other cities are doing, and also some agencies converting motels. Todd may want to talk about that a little bit. AHF was here earlier tonight and talked about how they are converting 2 hotels into housing for homeless. Work programs, Albuquerque has come up with a good work program. Drop-in centers, that relates to what Councilmember D'Amico was talking about. I brought that up before. San Francisco and Philly are doing a drop-in center where it's not the shelter, but at least it's a shower, restroom, and access to services. Mobile showers, mobile laundry, and then maybe you can give us an update, Molly, on the application on reporting homeless. I think Stephanie mentioned to us at a forum that we had that there is that the county is working on an app, so that if you see a homeless person, you can report, so that at least outreach can come to them. Yes. And that way, hopefully more responsive to the community as well.
And Colleen is developing that app, so you have the expert right next to me.
Maybe I'll start there then and work backwards. So I mentioned that in the beginning of my remarks, one of the things that's confusing for people is there's different hotlines. Do you call you? Do you call you? Do you call me? Do you call you? And we found that was very confusing. So we're making a one-stop shop. That's a website. Right now the working name is LA HOP, the Homeless Outreach Portal. And if you're in Los Angeles County, you can put in a request, and through the magic of technology, it will route that request to the region's outreach coordinator, and then the outreach coordinator would then deploy that request to the appropriate outreach team. So in the case of a request for West Hollywood, it would go to one of the 3 teams that are working in the area, and they would deploy. One of the great things is we'd be able to track from the time of the request to the time that the team was deployed, and then what happened with that request. Was somebody actually there, or was the person in need not there? Was there a security issue? So then we might need to bring in our gentleman across the way. Or if maybe it wasn't the appropriate level of care, maybe we needed somebody, a mental health specialist, or perhaps even we need a higher level of 5150 or something like that. So this is we're beta testing it right now. As soon as it's ready, you'll be the first ones to know. Actually, you'll be the first one to know, but you'll be the first one. We'll be testing it out to see how this works. So it'll be, you can have cards and you can have the website, so you can let your citizens know, and I'd be happy to show it to you when it's ready, but it'll be a great tool. As for all the other things that you mentioned, motels, showers, access centers, all of these things, these are already things in our toolkit right now. We're looking to do more of them through Measure H funding, through, and I'll let Molly talk about the motel conversions and some of the legal stuff around that to try to do it, because the more tools we have, the better. We are using mobile showers also as a mechanism to be an engagement tool in communities. Again, we have a lot of NIMBYism, so making sure that communities understand why this is an important piece. It's a very important tool. Education, absolutely. I mean, jobs, education, and I was so pleased to hear about the work that's already being done, but the more we can do that. I mentioned rapid rehousing. There are funds, so if there's training opportunities for people who need it, we can fund that. So it's hearing about businesses who are willing to take on people and take a chance to hire them is huge. So those are pieces that absolutely we're doing, and the more we can do it, the better.
Yeah, I'll just put in a plug for land use regulation. And, you know, we're actually working on a motion right now in our office that will look at a bundle of ordinances, one being inclusionary zoning, because like I said, we need to catch up with you, but then also looking at a motel conversion ordinance and a permanent supportive housing ordinance that really streamline our ability to get those through the planning department, because we have seen the planning process be so onerous that projects fall apart. We did have a motel conversion in Temple City that fell apart because the process was so onerous, and it really it created a lot of discord in the community, and really lined people up against what should have been a really great permanent supportive housing development, and we don't want to see that happen again. So that may be a great thing to look at in your plan. Is, like I said, a motel conversion ordinance. The city's got a great draft permanent supportive housing ordinance that the county is looking to replicate. So I hope you'll look at those tools too.
I just want to support the idea of a one drop-in center, if you will, or we use an access center. You visited it, where people can access a shower. They come in, they have a meeting with their outreach worker. We can help do their laundry. It's not set up like a drop-in center per se. I think it would be worth looking at those models really carefully. Los Angeles has had sort of a mixed experience with drop-in centers in the past, so you would want to learn from those lessons. I also just want to say, during times of recession, the housing market actually loosens up for us. And so it becomes easier for us to get vouchers placed. And we bought our property during a recession. So there can be a silver lining to that from the standpoint of homeless services. Not that I would recommend it, but just so you know that that's been our experience. It hasn't been so bad for us. But I'm not saying we really want that to happen.
Word on the motel issue is that, we've all talked about the intense need there is and the lack of housing resources. And having spent a lot of time on this, especially if we look at the county, the city of LA is different, but there's literally thousands of units in the city, and there's far more in the county in terms of motel conversions that are possible, and motels make good projects. So if we're looking for any way to get from here to there in terms of scaling, because that's really what we're talking about, is creating units, I think motels hold a significant promise.
Because they're less expensive to convert than to build from scratch. And also a lot of times neighborhoods are actually positive about it because the motel has, brings about a different level of so, because the project would be supervised. And I think that's good for the neighborhood.
Councilwoman, our project on Vine at Santa Monica Boulevard was a former motel next to two schools. And actually, downstairs there was an X-rated movie theater in the building before we bought it. So people do prefer permanent supportive housing over X-rated movie theaters.
So I have a few comments, and then we'll try to wrap it up. Again, I want to thank everyone for being here and for the work you do. We talked about compassion, and I think compassion for people experiencing homelessness is really a cornerstone of our approach. But as we talk about this, we also need to be compassionate towards the residents who are not homeless, the businesses in the community, the library patrons who are not homeless, who have an expectation that they're going to be able to live in the community and enjoy the facilities safely without being threatened, without being attacked. I'm a little bit concerned, and you're aware, Captain Aloma, of incidents where a homeless individual has either threatened somebody or has attempted to steal something, and then the sheriff's department or somebody tells them there's nothing we can do. And in my mind, that's not, as Councilmember Horvath said, that's not really being responsive to that. And I know that isn't the approach of the sheriff's department, but that's certainly, we've gotten enough of those complaints from our residents that there is a problem out there. Your dispatcher shouldn't be saying, oh, well, it's a homeless person, there's nothing that we can do. If somebody has been the victim of an attempted theft or an attempted assault, there is intervention that needs to take place from law enforcement. It is not our first response, as was said by Shayla earlier. You're not our front line. Our front line is our contract agencies who are reaching out. But when there's criminal conduct, I think there needs to be a law enforcement presence.
No, I absolutely agree. And just to add to your comments, I think anybody that calls the sheriff's station, I don't see why the word homeless needs to be added to the conversation. If someone's being threatened, if there's a crime occurring, then we should be responsive to that, regardless of the person's social status or where they tend to lay their head at night, whether they're homeless or they have a home. If it's a crime, we respond to it. Crimes for service at the West Hollywood Sheriff Station over the last 3 years has increased each and every year. We get about 23,000 calls for service at the Sheriff Station that we actually dispatch deputy sheriffs to. If that's the kind of response that our desk is giving, then that's something that we deal with internally as a personnel issue and training, education, and discipline if necessary. But we respond to calls for service, absolutely. Great, thank you. I do want to add a few comments and maybe corrections here of some comments that were made. I really appreciate, Molly, your acknowledgement that the county doesn't have an inclusionary ordinance, doesn't have rent stabilization. It really is frustrating from my standpoint. You're all supposed to be the leader on this issue, and when you haven't done that, you know, how do we expect other cities to really take on their fair share? And I'm glad you acknowledged it, because I was going to raise it and ask you about it. But what are the prospects of that moving forward? You know, I know that it's a political battle, but I hope that's going to be moving forward quickly.
Yeah, so we did an affordable housing action plan that is being released any day now that recommends doing an inclusionary zoning ordinance, and so we are already drafting the motion to direct the planning department to draft that ordinance. So I think we'll have to see when that comes for a vote, when we bring that motion, but I think the prospects are very good to move forward on inclusionary zoning. I think with rent stabilization, we have a tenant protections working group that just started meeting, and one of the issues they're supposed to make a recommendation to the board to is about rent stabilization. That is not as much of a slam dunk. My boss is a gigantic supporter of rent stabilization and supports Costa-Hawkins repeal altogether, and would like to see rent control, not just rent stabilization. But you know, we're sitting through the hearings at the Tenant Protections Working Group, and it is controversial, and the apartment owners are very mobilized, and so we're trying to work through that one. But like I said, from our office, we're very strong supporters, but we'll see where my boss's colleagues land on that issue.
I would add another thing to the mix, and it's something that I've spoken to Assemblymember Bloom about, and that is the exemption for new construction. New construction, which is anything after 1978, is completely exempt from rent control, and we need to change that so that, let's say after 30 years, that's where the developer is looking their first 30 years. After 30 years, then it can be subject to any local control ordinance there is. I did want to correct something. We did at one point have a permanent shelter in the city of West Hollywood operated by PATH. We actually started it and funded it. It was essentially stolen away from us by the city of LA, and I think they actually got some county money to do that as well. So I feel a little bit annoyed that we're now being told we need a shelter locally when we did have one, and it was taken away from us. And also, Todd, you made a comment about us not having housing services, and I'm not sure what you were referring to, but we do have an inclusionary housing ordinance and a number of inclusionary units in the city. We have permanent affordable housing through our nonprofit organization, and a number of those units are supportive services with wraparound services, and some of them are targeted for people who were recently homeless. And I don't think that's what you're referring to, but I want to make sure the public doesn't come away with the perception that we don't have those kind of programs here. And then the last, I guess, 2 comments, or 3 comments I'm going to make, and then I'll shut up. Okay, I know, yes. The siting issues and the experience you're having with other cities that are not allowing siting, I think that's where we need legal aid, and to be bringing Fair Housing Act lawsuits against those cities. And I think if that's done in a couple of cities, I would imagine some of the other cities will realize that we're really serious about this. This is a responsibility of the whole county. The whole county has to bear its fair share of the responsibility. A lot of those LGBT youth, they're not growing up in West Hollywood, they're growing up in other parts of the county and coming here, and it isn't fair that we should have to bear the burden of providing all of the housing to address that. The one thing that hasn't really been talked about, and that is the motion that was made, and our supervisor voted against it, to allow for maybe more assertive work with those who are profoundly mentally ill. And Natalie, you mentioned, I think, 5150, reaching out to and allowing an involuntary hold on people who are mentally ill. Many of the people we're seeing on the street are profoundly mentally ill, and it does take a long time to work with them, but some of them are never going to get services no matter how much we work with them. And I think our public is expecting us to intervene, and we don't necessarily have the tools to do that. And I think that should be supporting some legislation that allows for compassionate intervention to assist these people. I think that's something that I at least want us to discuss and possibly be in support of. And I'm sure our supervisor had very good and legitimate reasons, and we love her for opposing it. But it is something that I think we want to have a discussion about, or at least I do, and decide whether we agree with her position or take a different position. That's it? Corey, any final words?
Oh, see, yes, but I don't want to now. I just want to add two numbers. Todd mentioned the 11 permanent housing placements that Step Up had in the last 15 months. Essentia also had 23. So we've housed in the last 15 months 34 people who were formerly homeless in West Hollywood into permanent housing. And I think just before we close, we had a lot of staff here tonight that were prepared to answer questions, and I want to thank all of them for all their work that they do. This homeless initiative for the city is truly a team effort, so I want to thank them, and I really want to thank our agencies and our community partners for being here at the table, being here in the audience, and helping us do the work on a day-to-day basis. We do have a lot of touchy-feely collaboration, but that's what is working right now, so we're really grateful for them.
And thank you all for staying so late. I know we kept you over our assigned time limit. Thank you all for being here. We are now adjourned.